Yes.
Okay, excellent, great. So I can't really see everybody. It's really white, but that's okay.
Should I introduce him or ask him to introduce himself? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
introduce himself.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay. Okay. So hi, I'm Smári McCarthy. I'm working with IMMI in Iceland, although I'm in Zagreb at the moment in Croatia. But so I'm the executive director of IMMI, the International Modern Media Institute, based in Iceland, and there we're working with a bunch of different things, including access to information, transparency, freedom of expression in general, and yeah, more or less all of the good stuff, right? So, should I just carry on, or should I begin?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So, I was asked to talk about freedom of information or access to information, and I'm going to start off with that and then run over into a bit of discussion about the question of democratic liquidity more generally. So first off, about freedom of information. So we have a tendency to think about freedom of information as if it's self-evident, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world to want to try and have all government documents accessible to everybody. But when we assume it to be self-evident, we are doing ourselves a bit of a disservice because it doesn't actually address the fundamental lack of belief in transparency that those who don't consider freedom of information to be self-evident suffer from. And also, it doesn't force us to define the purpose of access to information clearly, which leads us sometimes to use some very sloppy reasoning. And here I'm assuming that most people here are big freedom of information activists, or at least in favor of stronger freedom of information laws. So when we talk about freedom of information, we need to define its purpose. And I would say that the purpose of freedom of information is to eliminate the knowledge differential between citizens and the government. What that means in practice is that some people who are working in the government have much greater knowledge of what's going on than the general public. And of course, any amount of secrecy will make the knowledge differential positive. So if there's government secrecy for whatever reason, then of course the government automatically knows more than the citizens can, and therefore the knowledge differential goes up. Right, but sometimes secrecy is needed for reasons of privacy, national security. Some people cite international trade as a good reason. Sometimes there's works in progress that aren't ready for public consumption yet, and so on. But more generally, we have to ask ourselves what features are needed. So first, we need to apply all. So when we make a freedom of information law, it needs to apply to all branches of government and all projects funded by the government. And we can't have any artificial barriers to information acquisition. So, for instance, in Ireland, there's a very high price for accessing public information. It's in order to get government documents, you have to pay, I think it's €20.95 per hour of work to access documents, which is absolutely a very high barrier for most people, especially when most people don't even know that you can access these documents in the first place. Then we can't allow it to be subject to bureaucratic whims either. So a document must not be suddenly unavailable because it's politically inconvenient or in some way not beneficial to a particular party or something like that. And when there are exceptions to the availability of information, there needs to be a very narrow scope. So in that sense, we've sometimes talked about 3 generations of freedom of information, where the first generation is the absolute simplest. It is people may request documents. Then in the second generation, we say, okay, people can request whatever document they want, but that's not really sufficient because most people don't know which documents exist. So, so providing a list of documents is the step into the second generation. Then in the third generation, then you simply say, okay, first we provide the full list of documents publicly, but then we say, well, since we're already listing the documents, we might as well just make the names clickable. That is to say, make all documents available online unless they're explicitly held back. And when we hold back documents, when the government holds back documents, they should always cite why they're holding them back. Whose authority, what reason, what kind of justification is given, and more importantly, when is the document going to become public anyway? So even for documents which have privacy concerns, there is a time limit to those privacy concerns. It can be maybe a couple of decades, maybe it's the lifetime of the people involved, plus a couple of years, something, but there's always a time limit. So when we look at, given these 3 generations, if we look at some countries, Spain and Luxembourg are unique amongst European countries to not have general access to information laws. But then you have a couple of countries that are implementing the first generation. That's actually the most common at the moment. Ireland is amongst them. So in Ireland, it is still possible to request whichever document you want, but there's no information given a priori about which documents exist. There's a couple of countries which have moved on to the second generation, so that's Norway, Iceland, Estonia, and actually the European Union itself under Regulation 1024, I think it is, from 2004. So that's generally the outer bounds of access to information right now. But there's no countries which have explicitly implemented third generation rights yet. We have been trying to get it into it's actually included in the new constitution of Iceland, but the new constitution hasn't been ratified yet, and currently the discussion's being, as we speak, there's a filibustering going on in the Icelandic parliament, which is preventing it from being adopted. So, so there's no country at the moment, to my knowledge, which explicitly makes all documents clickable. On the other hand, the European Union and Norway have been very good about providing most of their documents in clickable format, so easy to access, downloadable, and you can, in most cases, request documents even if they are not publicly available. So that's kind of where we're at. But when we think about this in a larger context, we might say, okay, why are we bothering with accessing all these documents? Like, how is that generally going to help us? And there's always got to be a reason. One of the things that where we come at this is that governments generally are manufacturing a lot of content. They're manufacturing a lot of data over any time frame, and they literally have people sitting around writing reports, writing documents, creating all sorts of information. And the argument often goes, okay, the public has a right to know what the government is doing. But that's not actually sufficient, because we also need to have the right to tell the government to stop or to change the way the government is going. We need to have the general ability to step in and say, this is not acceptable, we want you to be doing this other thing, and so on. So, in a more general sense, societies are very messy things. There's all sorts of political strife, there's all sorts of complexity that comes up, and that's all well and good, except we do need to be able to step in. And when we talk about governments, we often forget the kind of genesis story of state theory, which is that basically through the decades, through the centuries, even millennia, we've had barbarians and warlords taking control of societies of various sizes, and sometimes leading them to prosperity and sometimes leading them to certain doom. But slowly this has settled into fixed systems of governance, which took to evolve and developed into the political hierarchies we generally see today, right? So when we look at these hierarchies, we have to ask questions. How can you describe them abstractly? What kind of form of cohesion keeps them together? You might say that studying power structures in terms of power groups would be the natural approach, but then you're missing a certain point, which is that all of these groups consist of people, and that's where the complexity comes from. People have differing opinions, and so without individuals, there's no society, and without society, the concept of the individual is completely meaningless. But the symbiosis between the one and the all is basically what's been put in the back seat for at least the last 200 years. And the discourse has been centered around individualism versus socialism, and economic independence for those who could afford it versus social resilience for those who have been disenfranchised from power. And access to information is basically a power grab. It's saying we, the hitherto completely disenfranchised, want to be able to see what's happening and take an active role in governance. So that's where kind of a lot of us, at least I'm guessing that many in the group here are coming from, basically living on the internet, where the ideas of scarcity of information have completely fallen down. And once we have that potential, then then we start to notice a lot of really interesting things about the way governance works. So on a broad scale, there's two different socioeconomic control systems that exist to capture and mediate decisions either on a collective or individual levels. And that is to say, we have two formal explicit systems for mediation of intent. One of them is money, simply, which is about mediating the intent of the individual, and the other is votes, which is to mediate the intent of society. Or that is to say, with money, I say, I intend this for me, whereas with votes, we normally say, or you could say, I intend this for society. And when we, the choices that the average person in any given moment has is a function of the flexibility of their environment, the burden of their obligations, the types of control that a person is subject to. And one of the, if we look at money for a moment, we can say, due to the nature of monetary systems, it's most of the time it's more important to have high liquidity than it is to have a lot of money. That is to say, if I have billions of euros locked up in stocks or bonds, that's not really useful to me if I want to go and buy an ice cream, if I don't have any loose change. So liquidity is kind of the important thing there. And so with money, we get this feeling of the need for liquidity very instinctively. But when we're talking about our interface with governance and decision-making in society scale, we say, yes, okay, we need information, we need to know what the government is doing and why they're doing it, but we don't often say we need to have sufficient democratic liquidity to be able to make the decisions we need. That is to say, if we take this analogy a bit further, our total democratic capital is the one vote we get handed over from the government once every 4 years, So we get one vote issued by Fiat from the government once every 4 years, and we are required to invest it in full on one of the choices on the ballot box. And essentially we're making this investment, or we're losing our capital, and there's a negative return on investment almost every time, because frankly political parties aren't really doing things the way we want them to, and generally lots of decisions are being made without us actually having an ability to jump in there. So taking this back into kind of the idea of so Enlightenment era values. The Enlightenment said that we should have two things. We should have democracy and we should have enlightenment. And we often attribute the enlightenment factor to the education system. But freedom of information is simply the natural conclusion on that realm of saying, not only do we need an education, we need to be able to use that education to understand how governance is being performed. And then the other thing is we need democracy, which does not just mean choosing a couple of people into some kind of room where they can shout each other and disagree with each other for 4 years, but also being able to participate in society to the degree that we wish, and without the participation or non-participation being harmful to people, right? So to kind of summarize, we need to fight for much expanded freedom of information rights, and that's kind of where we've been going for the last couple of years with great advances in Norway, in Estonia, and in Iceland, and various places. But that alone is not going to be enough. We need to have the participatory democracy models in place that allow us to use the information that we get, not just through active citizenry and lobbyism or staging protests or rallies, but also through direct choice making through explicit mechanisms. So that's more or less all I have to say.
Thanks, William. Does anybody have any questions for Smári? I think some people, I certainly know Smári from his background with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and the background to IMI being proposed in Iceland after the financial collapse. That, I don't know if you know the history of it, that there was a proposal that Iceland would become a haven for data, or a haven for information, that would be not subject, that would have a kind of an international standing, where people would be able to safely deposit information in Iceland, and that Iceland would then protect that information. Almost like an offshore tax haven, but instead an offshore information company. And Smári, would you be able to explain a little bit about that particular legislative procedure and where it's at the moment in Iceland?
Yeah, sure. So we started off with this pretty big plan of trying to review all information legislation. And that doesn't mean one big legislative proposal, but rather we had to change, we started off with changing about 14 or 15 different acts of law. So far, we're almost 3 years down the road since we started. We've had changes made to, so there's new media transparency law, which includes strong source protection. We have some changes to the Telecommunications Act, which make information security better. We've had a new Freedom of Information Act adopted, which brings us up to the 2nd generation and possibly 3rd generation, depending on implementation details of the freedom of information idea. And there's a lot of kind of minor tweaks and changes. One of the things that got tabled but probably won't get dealt with in the last couple of days of the parliamentary session is a complete revamp of libel law. So and also changes to the rules about government employee secrecy. So there's 2 bills which are ready but haven't actually gone out yet, haven't gotten voted on, and probably won't in this session. And there's still a long way to go. We've got about, I guess we're almost 1/3 of the way there. So, we knew when we were starting this that it would probably take a long time. And we've also realized that political processes are rather slow and really kind of cumbersome, and you can only push them so fast. So that's why I actually spend about 2/3 of my time dealing with things outside of Iceland, because frankly, you start the pushing in Iceland, then you go out of the country and just leave it be for a while, and hopefully if we do this enough, the plates will keep spinning, right?
Has anybody got any questions for Smári? If you do, please come up here because the microphone is right there.
I have a question, Smári.
Yep.
The world has been very impressed by the way Icelandic people were able to crowdsource constitution, which is right now in jeopardy, I think.
Yes.
But like anyway, how you were able to do it? Can you say?
Okay. So after the financial collapse in Iceland, there was a lot of demand for a new constitution. And thankfully, the new Social Democrat left-green government coalition decided to respond to that demand by instituting a national assembly, which collected ideas from 0.5% of the population were chosen at random from the census and summoned to a big meeting hall. Of course, this being Iceland, 0.5% of the population is actually only about 1,500 people. So, it's not that great. But still, it's a representative portion of the society. And they, over the course of one day, they put together a large number of proposals, which went through into a committee, which went through them. Then there was an election to put 25 people onto a constitutional assembly, and that assembly decided to be very participatory and accept all sorts of proposals from the general public through Twitter, Facebook, email. They had a form on their website. They accepted YouTube videos as comments. So they wanted large-scale public participation. There wasn't actually that many people involved in making proposals to them, but still, it was overall a very good process. And over the course of 4 months, they came up with the best constitutional proposal I've ever seen. And I've read several dozen constitutions, so it's that's, I'd call it high praise. But at the same time, the entire thing falls down in that in Iceland the parliament is sovereign, and constitutional changes do not happen by way of referendum. So there's already been a referendum on this, and 76% of the population said that they were in favour of this new constitution. But it was a non-binding referendum, and the government just said, or the parliament just said, well, we're going to have an argument about this, and it's going to stand until the elections, and that's where they're at today. So there is a chance that the entire process might fall down because of a couple of annoying conservative idiots, to be quite frank. But that said, there are quite a number of parties running for the parliament now in the election. There's a record number of 20 parties, and most of them have on their agenda to get the new constitution adopted. So I, for one, I'm running on behalf of the Icelandic Pirate Party, and I've said that if the constitution does not go through now, the first thing I would do if I get elected, which is entirely uncertain, is to reintroduce the proposal, right? So it's that's basically where we're at. It's kind of this ugly game of chess between all of the political actors, whether they're whoever they are.
Thank you, Smári. Has anybody got any more questions? I think it's the pizza here. Yes. Has anybody any more questions before we have early pizza? Or has Smári answered all of your questions already? One more. Come on up.
Yeah.
How would you see Ireland moving towards a similar position from Iceland in terms of get that engagement and sourcing?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Sorry. Do you see a path for Ireland to emulate what Iceland has done
Right.
in relation to constitutional change.
Right. Well, so the okay. So first, a disclaimer: I'm half Irish. So when I say that one of the big problems in Ireland that I've noticed politically is there's a very high level of cynicism about the ability to get anything done, and we had the same cynicism in Iceland up until the crash, and often you just need to have a proper crisis to realize that you can get something done. You should never waste a crisis. But it seems to me that Ireland's already had its crisis and it was somewhat wasted. So now there's a question of can you try to get people to see that what the response to the crisis in Ireland was the very much the wrong response. The banks were bailed out. There's been no big reforms of laws or regulatory measures, and so maybe it's time to start from scratch as if the crisis had just begun today. And from what I've seen from the Irish media and so on, since nothing's actually changed, it might as well have started today. So get people angry and go out on the streets and just drop the cynicism. You can enact change. I'm sorry to not be able to give a better kind of packaged, concrete response, but really it's all about just having meetings like the one you're having and saying, okay, we have these problems. Now, what the hell are we going to do to fix them, right?
Thanks so much, Smári. We're going to have food quickly because it's going cold. So
Okay.
really joining us as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks.
Have a good evening.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
See you.
See you.